Woo!
Hey, hey everyone. Super excited to bring to you one of my favorite mentors, Zack Mulhall, who is an amazing leader. He's a mentor to many. He's a male ally at LinkedIn, and he's saving many lives. Just guy that just does it all, man. I'd love to introduce to you, Zack. Glad to have you here.
Davidson, thanks for having me. Totally honored that you're giving me the opportunity to talk on your podcast today. I've listened. So many people I've heard said great things about it. So thank you for letting me come on.
No, that's awesome. Yeah. No, I definitely wanted to have you on. I feel like you're one of those guys who I feel like is, or at least from the outside, seems like you do it all, right? Like you do well at your job. You're like a loving, caring boyfriend and partner, and I feel like you check all the boxes in terms of like what I would consider a fulfilling, purposeful life. So, we'd love to kind of dig deeper to see. Obviously, I'm sure all of this didn't happen overnight, so we'd love to kind of learn a little bit more about like your story and how you've gotten to where you are now.
Yeah, of course. And thanks for all the kind words, Davidson. It definitely, day in, day out on my side doesn't necessarily feel that way, but I'd love to kind of talk through, how I got to where I'm at and how I'm like a ruthless prioritizer. And I think that's how I'm able to do and spend time on the things that I love.
Ruthless prioritizer. I haven't heard those two words combined, but I like it.
I think it's important. I think, when you think about what's important in your life, I think what's really helped me a lot is identifying what are those 5 or 10 things that I love and can't do without. And I feel like once I've identified those, then nothing else gets in the way. It's when something else comes up, whether it's a happy hour or someone wants to hang out. If it's one of those, 10 things that mean that much to me, nothing gets in the way of it.
So what are those 5 to 10 things, if you don't mind sharing?
Of course. So I would say when I look at what's most important to me in life, I think friends, family, my job, physical fitness, and activities that I do within fitness, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more later. Toastmasters, which you're a part of at LinkedIn, is really really important to me. BuildOn, which I'm excited you're going on this year, and really any other opportunity to continue to like to grow myself are 6 or 7 areas that I find are really really beneficial. Now I know we can talk about like friends and family, but I think what I wanted to do was find like those 2 or 3 extracurricular activities
Okay.
that meant so much to me and like really really lean into those. So I would say like BuildOn and Toastmasters are the 2 that really come to mind right away.
And even within those categories, do you have like a first, like a stack ranking of first and second and third?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost always comes my family, which includes my girlfriend Rose. From there, I would say it's kind of a tie, depends on the day, between my friends and my professional career.
Hmm.
I would say like those 2 are like tied. I would say next would be BuildOn. Then I would move into physical fitness and like activities that I love to do, such as yoga, jujitsu, and then Toastmasters and like public speaking.
Interesting. And I guess there's a correlation between work and friends, right? Because it seems like you integrate the two pretty well.
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. And yeah, I think I get a lot of this the social desire that I have and like the extroverted person that I am. I get a lot of that from work, which I feel like you do the same, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would say so. I met someone once that said you're the most extroverted person I've ever met in my entire life. And I was
Now,
like,
do you now outside of work, do you feel like you're extroverted as well, or is that something are you kind of like an introvert and extrovert?
yeah, that's a great question. I do think as I get older, I become more and more introverted,
Mm.
but I think the coronavirus has made me really look at, okay, I'm pretty extroverted in the sense that it's literally killing me to be at home.
Yeah.
But to your point, I do love meditation. I love reading a good book. Like I think since this corona thing has happened, I've finished like 10 books already.
Yep.
Just been like, so I do like that time, but for me, like I'm very extreme. It's like I sometimes I just want to veg out a whole weekend and just read like 3 books, and then sometimes I'll when I'm at work, I'll be I volunteer almost every day. So sometimes I won't get back till like 10 o'clock and then
Yep.
over again the next day. So,
Well, I'm glad you brought up books too, because that was actually something that I overlooked. Like when I look at something that's really, really important to me, it's reading. I started a book challenge this year where there's a group of about 8 of us, and the challenge is to read 24 books, with 2 of those books being outside of your comfort zone.
yeah, yeah.
Now, I'm glad you brought it up though that you read 10 books, because what I'm trying to figure out is over this break, I've read 7 books,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
I've enjoyed every minute of it. I love my Saturdays and Sundays where I can spend 5 hours of just reading, and it's meant so much to me. But I'm trying to figure out how I can bring that back to post-COVID life. Like, is that something that's realistic?
Hmm.
Um, what are your thoughts? Like, are you going to continue reading at the clip that you are now?
I do love reading. Like I do think what's been interesting for me is I'll wake up a little bit earlier, so 30 minutes earlier, and then I'll read an extra 30 minutes before I start my day.
I love that.
So that's been interesting. So because it's so quiet and I don't get interrupted, because sometimes when I read, whether it's on the weekend, my fiance will come in and be like, "Oh, let's play board games," or people will call me up. But in the morning, it's like those 30 minutes. It's like sacred. It's like, okay, at least I know I'll get at least 30 minutes every day of reading.
I love that idea. And I think, when I start thinking about prioritization, that's one area that I feel like I can do a better job of, is like just extending my days. So instead of maybe getting the 8 hours of sleep, maybe I'm good on 7 hours of sleep, and I can use that extra hour to work on things I love, the BuildOns of the world, the reading. So I think that is an opportunity for everyone to adjust and like look at sleep. Like, are you potentially oversleeping?
Huh? Do you think you're oversleeping?
I don't think I need 8 hours of sleep. So I'm usually in bed, like, over the break, over not break, but over COVID, I've been, in bed at 10:30, up at 6:30. That's 8 hours. Like, I think I could sustain myself on 7 hours of sleep.
Yeah. And have you ever have done that where you consistently get 7?
Yeah, so I've done that in the past, like pre-COVID life. I love yoga. So like my Monday mornings, for instance, I'll do a 7 a.m. yoga class right around work. I work at LinkedIn, as you know, but to your viewers, in the Empire State Building. So I'll do a class right down the road at 7, which requires me to wake up around 5:30. And I'll usually do that throughout the week because I love meditating in the morning just like you do. So that was another habit that I got into, is if I'm not doing yoga, I like to do meditation first thing in the morning.
Hmm. So I think meditation is something that's definitely becoming more mainstream as big companies like LinkedIn and others start to incorporate that into even work.
Yeah.
I think we're lucky now that we have daily meditations with Scott. It's amazing.
Crazy. Yeah.
But we'd love to learn like why did you get into meditation, and maybe sort of some of the benefits that you've seen so far throughout various stages in your life.
Yeah. So I started meditating when I came to New York. It's now been almost 4 years. It's been about 3.5 years. And growing up, I grew up in a space where you really didn't talk about your feelings. You really didn't identify if something was wrong. Like, we didn't have a word for anxiety when I was a kid.
Mm,
The world I grew up in, it just wasn't talked about. Depression wasn't talked about. So I think it took me a really long time to realize that I had this underlying anxiety.
mm,
And there was a lot of things I think that was funneling into this anxiety. But I think when I came to New York and I was in a space like LinkedIn and around people that now started expressing themselves differently and talking about their feelings, that was really the first time that I looked inward, and I started to identifying and noticing that I had a lot of triggers. And a lot of that fed into this anxiety and this really like strong underlying anxiety. And so I recognized that, and about 4 years ago, at the time, had meditation was more and more coming up. To your point, now I think it's more in the mainstream. Then it was just a little bit before getting mainstream, but I was hearing more and more that that could lead to helping anxiety, and that's really what started it for me. It was every morning I meditated, and I just started to like check more in with myself. How are you feeling? Why are you feeling this way? And I think what I've noticed is over the past 4 years, my anxiety has really dulled.
mm.
And I've also just been able to spot it. And that's what's helped me with the most about meditation, is now I'm able to call out my feelings, which I think has helped me so much. Is like recognizing they're there.
Yeah.
And to your point, one thing that I loved about LinkedIn is now there's this sense of community where when I was doing it 4 years ago, I didn't really have anyone to talk to about it. But now, me and you can jump on the phone, or I'm talking with a good friend of mine, Stefan, and we can openly talk about meditation and what it's doing for us. And I think for me, like, that sense of community in anything that I'm doing means so much.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think if I was to dial it down to what is true happiness, I always find, at least for me, it always comes back to community. Like that's always the underlying theme that I see amongst when I was the happiest
Yep.
with anything, any place in life.
Agree with that. And so now you're seeking out that community. In the past, how do you think one can find that community? What are some ways to go about finding community?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think finding like following your instincts and following like what your curiosity is always good. It's interesting for me because I've noticed this with a lot of people, but we always gravitate towards what we didn't get or what we perceive we didn't get as a young child.
Mm,
So for me, because of my parents' divorce and not having a father, I was one of my survival mechanisms is like optimistic orphan. So in my
mm,
mind, so I felt so my survival mechanism was like trying to find a sense of belonging. So
mm,
trying to find groups to fit in, but I felt like I was a chameleon. Like I felt like as a part of a lot of different groups. So actually it took me a while to kind of like figure it out. But then after doing a lot of self-development work, I realized like, oh, actually everyone accepted me. I just didn't see it. My self-talk was that,
mm,
but it
mm.
was more self-imposed than anything.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. I love that chameleon idea. But again, it's getting back to that self-talk. But what I love too is when you can build the sense of community and things that you love. And I think that's kind of where our relationship has really blossomed. Was what I found is we have all of these connections
Hmm.
through these different organizations that we love. And I feel like that's where I typically find my community is in things I love. You have Landmark. You have all of these nonprofits you're involved in. And correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like you kind of find your sense of community through those things as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that as long as you follow what you're passionate about, you don't necessarily have to do that for a living. Like I think that's the ultimate goal. But even if it's a hobby, because you know what I find interesting, sometimes when you think you want to do something for a living, but then you're doing it every day for 40 hours a day, then it's like not as enjoyable. Whereas like maybe I volunteer maybe 2 or 3 hours every couple of days, that's enjoyable. But I don't know if maybe if I volunteered for 40 hours a day, who knows, right? I don't think it would have the same impact as if I just volunteered, a few hours a week or something like that.
I could not agree with you more. And I'm sure you thought about it a lot, but I think about it all the time. A passion of mine like BuildOn, I always think to myself, like, could I take this and do this as a full-time job? But a
Hmm.
big part of me thinks that I love the space that I'm in right now. I get to do what I love at LinkedIn, but then BuildOn is this like really, really amazing passion project that I have, but I can have both worlds. And I think, yeah, I don't think necessarily you have to do that passion or that, nonprofit that you love full time to still feel committed to it and, feel that sense of community through it.
So share with us a little bit about how you first heard about Build On and why you've decided to continue doing Build On like year over year, because it is a commitment, right?
Yeah. So for those of you that are listening that don't know what BuildOn is, so BuildOn is a nonprofit organization. They've been around for about 20 years, and there's two branches of BuildOn. There's the domestic branch that helps in inner city schools. The BuildOn that we work with is their international arm. So BuildOn has built over 1,600 schools over the past 20 years, and they work in 8 countries. So essentially, what we do every year, there's a group of us that's growing and growing, is we go into these countries, we raise money all year, and we build schools alongside local villagers. So where my start came was 4 years ago now. I was sitting with a good friend of mine. Her name was Naz. She recently had moved from the Dublin LinkedIn office, and we were sitting down talking. We were having lunch, and she was like, "Hey, I'm going on this project, and we're going to build a school in Haiti. But the problem is, a lot of people keep dropping out."
Hmm.
And she said it in passing, and I was like, "Can you repeat that again?" And she's like, "We're leaving. We're leaving in a month. We're going to build a school in Haiti. We need more people to come." And I was like, "I'm there." And she like kind of explained to me a little bit more about, what their mission is. And I'm like, I'm in, I'm all in. And I think it's important to call out at that time. The reason why I was like all in for that was I was kind of like looking for my thing. I was new to New York. I didn't have that sense of community yet. I didn't really know anybody at LinkedIn. So I was like, my ears were open to every opportunity I could find. I was jumping in like head first into any opportunity that presented itself because I wanted to find something to be that I loved and that I cared about. And it was almost just like perfect timing. And so when you go into these villages, you live with the villagers, you build alongside the villagers. And what I love about this project is that there's just so many beautiful things about their mission. One that always stands out at me is every school that gets built, it's 50% boys, 50% girls. I mean, as everybody knows, in the developing world, it's super difficult for women and girls to get equal access to education. So BuildOn has a program in place that it has to be 50% each.
Oh,
So it is a big commitment. Like we're going this year, Davidson and myself are going to Malawi, fingers crossed, in November. But you're there in the village for 7 days, plus with travel and everything, it's about 10 days. But I think what keeps me going back is every year, one, the group is growing. So when we started, there were 7 of us. We're going this year, we're going to build 4 or 5 schools, and there was over 50 of us going this year. So that's really exciting to me, is like seeing the momentum and seeing people really get excited about this. Um, Besides the fact of like being in the village, seeing how excited both the Trek participants and the local villagers are, like that gets me going back. It gets me so energetic. But more so too, like a normal vacation just doesn't seem like a vacation anymore. Like, like there's kind of like, me and my girlfriend Rose have the conversation all the time. It's like, do we want to go vacation somewhere, which we still definitely do. But to me, what outweighs all of those is this opportunity to go to a place we never would have the chance to go to, meet such interesting, unique, fascinating, loving people, and then do it with a group of people and like get an opportunity to meet and grow and develop with 15 other track participants. It's beautiful.
that's awesome. They kind of like hearing you say that, it kind of reminds me of like a meditation where you close your eyes and you picture the feelings and emotions there, like during the opening ceremony or when you're getting introduced and you're meeting the villagers for the first time. Like it's pretty cool. It's like very connected.
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes me back, just that idea of that connectiveness. You can be in a village for 7 days. We talk about being present all the time in meditation. You're in a village for 7 days. There's no community. There's no electronics. So it's wild, the relationships that you can build with like how close me and you are going to get. It's going to be amazing because we're going to talk all the time. You're going to tell me how you're feeling. There's a group of 12 of us that just talk about everything because that's all we have. We don't have phones. We don't have all this other noise and these distractions. It's just us, the villagers, and building this school.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think it was cool because honestly, one of the reasons why I decided to do it is because like you, Andy, and Jordan are 3 people who I really look up to. And I'm like, all right, not only are they like producing, they're always helping others out, they're always giving, like people that I'm like, all right, clearly like there's something about it. So maybe it's just that giving mentality, like the abundance mentality that helps you be successful as well, right? Because I think because when you live a life of service, I think that's what leaders are, right? Leaders are always like being of service to
Yeah,
others.
it's beautiful. And something you called out at the beginning around how it looks like I do it all. I would throw that back at you, and it seems like you do literally everything from Leah to Landmark to constantly taking LinkedIn learning courses. And it also feels that everybody wants you to be part of their thing. I talked to people in Leah 6 months ago, and they're like, we want Davidson bad. Like, we want him. We want him. How do you decide? You have all these people that want you to be part of their programs. You have all these nonprofits that want you. How do you decide where you're going to spend your time and which ones to go after?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, it's like going back to like what makes me feel good. And I think nothing else feels better than when I am volunteering, like when I help out high schoolers from iMentor or with Streetwise Partners. I just signed up for another cycle, so that's another 3-4 months commitment, right? So it's like when I'm there, like yesterday I interviewed um, like a Baruch student who was applying. So it was a mock interview. It was a 30-minute interview where I pretended I was a financial investment firm HR interviewing him for a software engineering internship. And I felt so satisfied afterwards that I was just like, man, like this is the meaning of life, like just helping people out. So for me, I think it just goes back to like if I feel good. But to your point, prioritization, I do think I'm getting much better at saying no, or I'll say like, hey, I can't get back to you right now. Like, let me get back to you on Friday, or reach out to me in a week or something like that. So now I'm getting better about just being mindful with my time. But it is tough though, because you are right. I think like with people like me and you, people just always want you to be a part of their mission, right? Because they see the value that we can add from energetic standpoint, but even like the doing, right? I think the reason why we connect so well is because we both have like a good mix of like what people call like the feminine energy, where you're able to read people and have compassion, and then the masculine energy was which is like the actions and like the act of actually like getting stuff done. I feel
Yep.
that that's probably why I look up to you, because I'm like, oh, like many people have one or the other, but I feel like you have like a good 50-50 balance of both.
I, I love that. And I think one thing you said that I wrote down and stuck with me too was you asked like what keeps you going back on these trips. And what you said was spot on. It's like what keeps you going back to these nonprofits? Like just that feeling that you get. It's like if I could just bottle up. One of our Trek leaders told me this. When he was looking at all of our faces, and when we're building and we're creating all these connections, he's like, if I could just bottle up the feeling that I have right now, and just keep that feeling forever, it's kind of like a drug in a way. It's like I just want that feeling. I
Yeah.
want I want to keep having that. And I think the biggest, honestly, like one of the biggest struggles that I have is when I come back, I want to tell everybody about this.
Mhm.
It's like, oh, it's like I have a secret.
Yeah.
And it's like, I want to tell everyone this secret and get everyone to come with me. But what I realized when I come back, there's only a small percentage of people that are like on board, jumping into it. Let's do it. And like, that's why I love you. I love the Cats of the world, the Andy Linders, because it's like, let's do it. I love you and I know you love it, so I'm gonna try it. But there's just a small percentage of people that have that. Um, and that's like something I'm trying to figure out, like how to grow.
Thing. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I feel like if we knew the magic formula, we would be like Jeff Weiner, right? I feel right. But actually, like, let's table this and go back to this. I want to ask you a question. Walk me through what was the feelings and what was the emotions when you won the Male Ally Award. I'm curious as to like what was going through your mind, like the self-talk, like the feelings, like everything.
Yeah, so I would go back to last year. I was nominated uh, last year for the Ally Award, and there was a guy in the office, Ezra, who's phenomenal. Like I completely looked up to, everyone in the office looked up to, and he deservedly won. And I remember like seeing him, I think he walked up, he might have even said like a speech, but just like seeing him up front, I was like, if I could one day like win this award, like that would mean so much to me. And I really never thought that I would even have an opportunity. Like it seemed like such a far away award. And when I sat down, um, I felt really good, but the self-talk in my head was, I still don't deserve it. Like I just feel like there's always more that you can be, especially when it comes to being an ally. It seems like such a big thing to tackle that I'm trying to get over some of that negative self-talk. But when I was sitting there, it was like I can't.
Huh.
I don't think I'm gonna win this. I don't think I'm gonna win it. Then when I won it, it was like this, just like such a rush of amazing emotions. And my previous manager put together um, the script that they used to announce me, and some of the things that she said like got me to tear up, like some of the nicest things. And I think one of the things she said that really stuck with me, and people said in a follow-up, some of the ladies in the New York office, was he really listens when you talk.
Hmm.
He really really listens when you talk. And to me that just meant so much, because being an ally, like one thing that I try to do whenever I sit down in these Women at LinkedIn sessions is really show up and listen and try to like understand some scenarios that I'm clearly not going through on a day to day. So getting to your question, like how I felt, I mean, out of this world, out of this world.
That's awesome. Huh. I'm curious, like, so you described a little bit, but do you actually like like during your meditations, do you sometimes do like a visualization exercise where you like actually see yourself going up there and like accepting the award, giving a speech? Like, do you go to that length of visualization?
At times I will do visualization. I it is part of my meditation practice. I didn't have for the male ally award, I didn't have that part of my visualization practice. A lot of what I do for visualization is more around um, like just preparation. I guess more of like my actual work day, like focusing on that. I guess for the Women at LinkedIn award, I just didn't think I was going to win it. So I didn't really even focus on visualizing about that.
Hmm,
Um, but it definitely is a part of my practice. I use Headspace, and I'll usually will go with the tracks or the packs that they'll guide me through. So if they're part of that track that I'm within, I'll utilize that.
I see.
Does
Okay.
that make sense?
Yeah, so Headspace was also my gateway drug into meditation.
What do you use now?
Dude, I'm such a weirdo. I actually have like 8 or 9 different meditations I do depending on like how I'm feeling.
That's amazing. And how long have you been meditating?
I think like similar to you, you said 4 years. You've been
About 4 years, yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much exactly around 4 years, maybe a little bit less. But I don't. I feel like time just flies by, so it's hard to like put a quantifiable time frame. But I do remember the first like year, I was like, oh my god, this is like the hardest thing.
Yeah. And what got you into it?
I think like similarly, like because it was interesting because like what you said about me, you're like, well, it seems like I do it all, right? But then in my mind, like I'm not like as successful as I could be. Like I'm not crushing my quarter. Like like I could be doing more prospecting, even though like I think I touched like 600 whatever already this week. Like like but then the self talk is always like, oh, like I could be like
Yeah.
doing more money, so it's weird. Like just hearing you say that, I was like, that's weird. But
No, that's great. And I think one thing I want to call out that you said the other day was like with meditation, just like with anything else, it's like you really got me to think in the mindset of you have to do it in different arenas. And like and the more that you do it, whether it's with LinkedIn or whether it's with Headspace, like each of them have their own value in themselves.
yeah, yeah, I think transcendental meditation, I think felt like was really really good because
Mm,
you get into this like almost out of body experience like
mm.
pretty often, just because of the methodologies of what they teach you is pretty cool, and it's like a much longer meditation as well. It's like a almost 30-minute commitment. So I think
What
any
do you use for that?
Hmm?
What do you use for transcendental? Do you have any recommendations?
It's actually its own like method. So you go in person and they teach you in person, and then you can do it at home.
Okay.
It's like its own like they teach you like a mantra and like yeah, there's like a whole methodology to it. Um,
It reminds me of, have you done a Kundalini yoga?
oh yeah, that's just crazy.
Isn't it wild? Like I like got out of that class and like, where am I right now? Like what just happened to me?
Yeah.
It was such like a fun out of body, like I felt like I knew myself so much better after the hour of Kundalini.
Huh. Yeah, I have to try it again. I think I was just it was definitely outside my comfort zone, so I think I was like way too much like thinking about it.
There's a good one in Midtown. We'll have to go when we're back in the office.
Okay, yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
Huh. Um, so like I'm curious, like, do you think if you, I mean, if you don't, if you don't mind sharing a little bit more about your past, but do you think like if you had like a pretty like normal upbringing and you would be so into all this like Toastmaster, self development work, meditation, volunteering, and all that stuff?
That's a good question. I personally don't think I would. And the reason being is I think Like, I had a little bit tougher of a childhood. Like, we were never really financially stable. We needed government assistance growing up. I was one of 5 kids, and I think what it took was all throughout high school, I thought my life was normal because it didn't seem like everyone around me lived that much differently. Like, most people around me were a little bit more well off. But what I think it took was once I got to college
Uh,
and I was able to kind of like step back and be in like a different bubble, I was like, "Oh my God, this like what I grew up in wasn't normal."
mm,
And I think from that point, it was like my sophomore year of college, I think was when I was more conscious of what I was doing. And I was able to like pause and say, like, what am I trying to accomplish? And I think the thing that was in the top of my head all throughout college and really even to this day is I don't want to be like in the financial and the social situation that I was growing up.
mm.
And one way that I found that I can get myself out of those types of situations is continual development, continual self-development, like continuing to work on myself and never live this idea that you have to be stagnant. And I think there was like this this mantra, I'm sure you've probably heard it too, like I got it a lot when I was in high school because of the way that I grew up was high school will be the best days of your life. Like, did you ever hear that from people? Like, high school or college will be the best time of your life.
Yeah, definitely.
And I know what I tried to tell myself was, let's make every year better. Like, let's just continue to develop on yourself, and like,
Yeah.
let's never be the type of person that looks back and say, 28 was the best year of my life.
Mm,
Like, the way that I try to live is by saying 30 is gonna be the best year, and then when I'm 30, it's gonna be 31's the best year, because I don't wanna live in this mindset of 20. Like, when I'm 70, I wanna say 71's gonna be my best. Like, that and that is kind of the mindset that I took on all those years ago in college.
yeah, I mean, I just got chills hearing you say that. That's awesome. Huh. You know, it's an interesting concept as well. Sometimes I do think, like, what if everything was so I find I feel like I struggle to find that balance of like, what if everything was okay? Like, what if I'm fine the way I am and I don't necessarily need to like work as hard, right? Like, what if life was easy? Because I do think my self talk is like life isn't easy, but then I think that's just my way of like telling myself like, oh, I need to work harder.
Yep.
So I don't know. It's an interesting concept
Where are you going with that? Expand on that a little bit.
because I do think like in many ways my life has been so much easier even though I'm like quote unquote doing more things, right? Like
Yep.
the new, taking on the Leah leads and then also adding on BuildOn in addition to Orphans Future Alliance and I Mentor and Streetwise Partners, blah blah. And it's like on paper, if anything, that should make me more stressed out, right? If
Mm.
anything, I'm releasing more podcast episodes, I'm writing more on my website, I'm doing a lot more YouTube videos. But if anything, like I feel like I'm the most at ease and the most at peace I've ever been. So it's like an interesting concept. But I think, yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm not articulating it in the, the best way.
No, I see what you mean because I get that idea is like is kind of what you were starting to say, and let me know if this is where you were going, was this idea that is it okay to have this idea that life right now is easy and things are good? Or should we be in the mindset of we should be doing more? Was that kind of where you were headed?
Yeah, I guess like what I was trying to say is like I think sometimes like my previous self talk would be like, oh, maybe I'll just like out exert everyone, like I'll hustle more and I'll outwork everyone. But I don't think that's always the most effective way of becoming more successful because I think you can
Agreed.
burn out that way.
Agreed. Yeah, it's funny because I feel like people like me and you, we work so hard that we do have the opportunity to overexert ourselves. So
Yeah.
that's something I've actually been thinking about more and more recently is like, how can I use my time just more efficiently? Because I've always been one of the people that has been like quote unquote the hardest worker, at least been called that.
Right.
And that leads to burnout. Like it does. Like you can only do it for so long. So I've been trying a lot to kind of like reprogram that idea in my head as well. It's like, how can I use my time just be more efficient with the time I have?
Right. So have you been, so it sounds like to your previous question, you're much better about saying no to things.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that that's where like that ruthless prioritization came in was like, I really had to identify what's most important to me. And I was talking with a friend about this recently, and it was like, identify those areas or those things that you love to do. Because probably like you, when someone says something to me, like, if someone were like, "Hey, I'm taking guitar lessons. Do you wanna take guitar lessons with me?" It's very hard for me to say no.
Yeah.
Like, it literally my instinct is always yes, and then later I'll figure it out. What
Right.
I'm trying to do is just take a step back and say like, "Hold on. I don't have time to take guitar lessons right now."
Mm,
And that's where that prioritization was so important to me of like, okay, if I do guitar, what's now falling out of the list?
yeah. That's interesting. And did you like how did you come to that realization? Like, I'm sure you weren't like, did you burn out a certain like a lot, and then you were kind of like, all right, like let me take a step back. Like, what's leading me to get to this point where I feel a little bit burnt out right now?
So I don't think it was never necessarily that I felt burnt out, but I think for me, what I recognized was in a lot of these things that I was doing, and I had a lot of conversations with my girlfriend Rose about this. It was I felt like the things I was doing, they could have been better. So a lot of the areas that I loved, like let's say for instance, like jujitsu. I've been doing jujitsu now for about 2 years, and I love it. I love going to class. But what I found was a lot of people that I was going with and who I started with were actually getting much better than I was.
Oh.
Or I was doing yoga, and I love yoga so much, but I wasn't developing at the rate that I wanted to. I wasn't hitting the poses that I really wanted to. And I wasn't necessarily being hard on myself. I just wanted to improve.
Mm.
And what I found was I wasn't able to put the mental energy into everything that I loved because it was always like, what's next? Like when I left jujitsu, it was like, oh, now I'm going to this next class. Now I'm going to learn how to cook.
Uh,
Instead of giving myself that 30 minutes after jujitsu to be like, okay, let's focus on what we learned in this class to get better. So I think once I was able to like take a step back and recognize that I was just taking on too much and I wanted to improve in those things that I loved. Like BuildOn's another example. There were times when I was like, I could be doing BuildOn so much better about a year ago. I could put so much more effort into this, but I just have too much other stuff going on.
yeah. That that's interesting. So do you like one of the strategies I hear is that you should only say yes to like nines and tens because I think
Mm,
tens will say yes to five, like sixes, six and a half, sevens, but even a seven and a half, like it's like no, like only nines and tens, and then that is how you. It sounds like you're looking to achieve mastery because then you're more focused as opposed to being like sevens at a lot of things.
exactly. I love the way you put that. And that's exactly it. That's exactly it. I want to be the nines and the tens at fewer things rather than the six or the seven at tons of things.
Yeah, but I don't know. I guess from the outside, it looks like you're nines and tens at everything.
You've never done jujitsu with me.
But it sounds like you've modified and you've made a lot of course corrections, and that's why you're at a place where it just seems like, you know,
Exactly. Exactly.
huh? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're kind of, well, it's almost an hour, so like I know that in the beginning of the conversation, um you wanted to talk like a little bit like about like routines and things like that. But like what would you suggest to someone who maybe is like, oh, I'm not a routine type of guy. I like to be like going with the flow, or someone that's like more spontaneous. Like, what advice would you give to them?
It's so funny you say that. So I consider myself spontaneous in certain aspects. Like I can go on a random vacation last minute. I can throw myself into really spontaneous things. But what I found is like my anxiety gets deeper if I don't have some type of structure and some type of, I like to think of it more as discipline.
Mm,
My girlfriend is exceptional when it comes to just going with the flow and being spontaneous. And I've really realized that since COVID.
mm,
What I would say is if you're one of those people that's super spontaneous, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a beautiful thing, and I think there's no right or wrong way to go about things, but just figure out what you love. Figure out what are those things that you don't want to give up, and just make sure you do more of those.
yeah.
Because I think that's talking to more and more people, especially over something like COVID, when things are just all over the place. If you're able to set aside time, and it doesn't necessarily have to be 8 o'clock every day. For me, being a prioritizer, I like having things scheduled. So I like waking up knowing I'm going to work out at 7 o'clock at night. For other people, that's not necessarily the case, but it's just have in your mind that you're going to accomplish those things you love. Because I'm guarantee you'll feel better at the end of the day. If you love to go bike riding, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to plan out your bike ride, but just tell yourself and make sure that you allocate some type of time throughout your day to do those things that you love.
Yeah, I think Jocko Willink said it best where he said, discipline is freedom.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
he gives a really good example of, yeah, because like when people think that structure is like, but actually structure gives you more freedom because then, you know that you're essentially like, you're always going to focus on those things instead of leaving it to chance. So, I,
I love that. I'm actually writing that down. I think I've heard him say that too. And for those that are listening that haven't watched or listened to his podcast, Jocko Willink's podcast is exceptional.
yeah, what was like one of your favorite episodes that he did?
So I actually started with his book. Um, one of my favorite episodes, he brought, and I'll have to look it up. He brought in, I know he brings people in from the army all the time, but he brought in somebody who fought, I forget where he fought in Vietnam, but he was like a special ops guy. And he talked a lot about like how he was able mentally to get through everything that he was. And it was just funny. And I think it resonated with me because it was like meditation before meditation. And what he talked a lot about was like training the brain. You know, this idea that yes, we can all get physically stronger, but you can also train your brain mentally as well. And he just kind of talked through a lot of what he had went through in the past through the war and like how he was mentally able to get through all that.
Mm.
How about you?
So I haven't, yeah, I was gifted his book as a gift. I feel like I really like Tim Ferriss's podcast. I don't know.
Right.
You're a huge Tim Ferriss fan as well?
So I'm a big Tim Ferriss fan. I would say I lean more. I like Joe Rogan's podcast a lot.
Oh, okay.
So that's where I probably like 75% of my podcast time is Joe Rogan, but I like Tim Ferriss a lot too.
But I'm curious so what about Joe Rogan? Because he's clearly like one of the best podcasters who's ever lived. Like I think he's invented the podcast game, right? Many would argue. But what do you think about him? What do you think makes his podcast so good and why it resonates with so many people?
Yeah. God, I'm so happy you asked me this question. So so I think there are so many things about his podcast that make it exceptional. To name a few, I think the first is his wide variety of audience or wide variety, I should say, of people who visit the podcast. He has Neil deGrasse Tyson. He has comedians. He has outspoken feminist. He has everybody along the board he brings on. He has Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard. So that's the first. I love that he brings everybody on the podcast. I have learned a lot from him when it comes to active listening. I think he's an exceptional listener, and I think he asks really good questions. And I love the format of his podcast. What I love that me and you did today was we just had a conversation. It didn't feel like you were interviewing me and asking me a bunch of questions or I interviewing you asking you questions. It just felt like a conversation between two friends. And that's how he is. He doesn't go into his podcast with a ton of notes. It's just two people talking to each other for hours and hours. And
Mm.
I think a lot of times we're in this area or this era right now where you watch a news show for 10, you see these like short little clips, but you really learn about someone when you hear them talk for an hour or 2 hours. And that's what I love is like I get an opportunity to learn something about Bernie Sanders because he just talks for 2 hours and it's just like a conversation. It's just so easy.
Huh. That's a good point. I was just listening yesterday. I was on Amazon. I was watching like Yo-Yo Ma being interviewed by like this like really famous private equity guy. David Rubenstein.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I felt like Yo-Yo Ma like wanted a more conversational type of conversation, and David like had like an agenda. Like it felt like he wanted to get through his list of questions, and then
Yeah.
I felt like he truly wasn't like being able to adapt to Yo-Yo Ma's answers.
Mm.
It's actually a pretty good takeaway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's so important, right? It's like, be flexible. Like in that conversation, that's where all the goodness comes from. Is just that free flowing conversation.
Mm. Well, Zach, I really appreciate our conversation. I feel like this hour went by so quickly.
It really did. It really did.
But yeah, I would say like some of the big takeaways is like follow your passion. Um, like figure out like what your main buckets are, like your five biggest priorities, whether it's family or your work or your spouse, whatever it is. I do think like digging a little bit deeper into what truly makes you happy instead of just kind of like going through with the motions, and then maybe one day you wake up, you're like, man, like where am I? It's like just to be intentional about that. And then I do think what also resonated with me is like when I like mentioned that like it seems like you have it all, but then I guess your actual inner talk is like, no, it doesn't seem like that. So that's interesting to see that, because I feel like you exude such confidence, so it kind of makes me feel like we're all human and we all kind of have very similar thoughts, even though yeah, so it's just interesting to see that like humanity. And yeah, like any other things that you would like to highlight or that you would want to leave people with? Like maybe what's an action item that you would want to leave with that people can actually implement or do that will help them move forward and be successful?
So I would say two action items, and you hit one of them. First is prioritize. So find your 5 or 10 things and list those out. Figure out what's most important to you. And then also, especially the situation we're in now, like if you are more of the spontaneous person, use this time to bring a little structure. I love the quote you said, structure is freedom, and it really is. Over this time, devote devote an hour or an hour and a half every day and have that structured in your day so that you know what's coming. Whether it's yoga, a walk around the block, meditation, whatever it is, give yourself that structure in your days, especially now that we're going through such a difficult time. I really think that it's important for everyone to have a little bit of structure or at least something planned in a time we're in now.
Yeah, that's so true. I think especially now because we're at homes and all of our structures and our schedules are kind of being like messed up because of like whether it's kids or being a teacher and being like an employee and being a mom and being like a chef and just kind of combining everything. I do think it is important to even schedule time to yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like you,
Yeah.
you need that time to maybe take a walk around the block or whatever it is that sources you. But I think now more than ever.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, Zach, I definitely want to acknowledge you for your active listening, your presence, your, pos- I think like your compassion and your ability to like truly put yourself into someone else's shoes. I feel like that's one of your secret powers. And yeah, just like I love your vision and your love for humanity of just like connecting us and bringing like social impact into the mainstream and making it available and making it possible for all of us that you can have it all, right? You don't have to just choose like work. Like you can have a fulfilling life that doesn't revolve around like just work, right? I think that's important.
Well, thank you. Thank you. First off, thank you for having me on here. I'm super grateful not only to be on here, but to have you as a friend. And I really mean that. So thank you for everything that you do. You mean a lot to me, and excited for this opportunity today. You're the best.
Awesome. Love you, brother. Peace.
Love you too. See ya.